There is a ton of information online for new knitters and seasoned knitters who just want to improve, and that's an amazing thing, except for the fact that not all of that information is true, or at least it's not as true as it is presented to you. Here are some examples of things that people say which I don't think are quite true, or at least the truth is a little bit more nuanced than they would have you believe. So, starting with number 1, your first knitting project should be a scarf. Let's start by saying that I understand why people would say knit a scarf. I understand the reason behind this recommendation. And it's kind of twofold. One is that a scarf is long, so it gives you a good opportunity to practice your knitting, especially if you're just going to do it in one stitch. You say you did it in a knit stitch, it'll be a great opportunity to practice that repetitive motion. So by the end of the scarf, you'll be very used to the motion of knitting. Another part of it is because it's long, it gives you an opportunity to practice your tension. So while at first it's not going to be great, as you knit your way through the scarf, your tension will improve and you'll end up with a really nicely tensioned scarf by the end. Therein lies the problem, because one, scarves are long, so they're going to take a very long time to knit. So you might think one afternoon, I'm just going to try knitting, right? Thinking that it's an afternoon activity. And you will be confronted with the fact that this scarf is going to take you days, if not weeks, if not possibly months, which is a very long time to get an initial payoff for the effort that you've put into knitting. So for that reason, I would recommend doing a smaller project, like for example, a beanie, or even just like when I first started knitting, I made little Halloween decorations, and that gives you that initial payoff that you need to encourage you to come back to knitting. Whereas if it's a scarf, you do a little bit of a scarf, you haven't really got anything to show for it, and you're not necessarily going to be motivated to come back and knit more. But number 2, even if you do persevere beyond the boredom of knitting a scarf, what you're going to find is as you get further into it and your tension improves, which is good because that was the aim of the whole thing, you're going to become more aware of what good tension looks like and what bad tension looks like. And so you're going to look back at the beginning of your project and think, oh, I wish that was a bit tighter. Oh, that went wrong and that went wrong and that went wrong. But yet it's still part of your scarf. So you've then got to slog through the remaining bit of the scarf for a scarf that at the end of the day, you know at least half of isn't very good. I don't know whether that's going to be something that by the end of it you want to wear. And so when you're sort of midway through and you're in a bit of a slump, where is the encouragement to keep going? Sometimes with knitting, things get tedious, invariably, but you're driven by the fact that you're like, oh, well, I can't wait to have my final product. But if you already know that half of the scarf is not very good, you're not necessarily going to be super excited to wear it once it's done. So I think that scarves actually have quite a lot to answer for, because I think it's the reason why a lot of people try out knitting and quickly decide it's not for them, because either they found it boring and slow, or they think, oh, well, I gave it a go and I wasn't good at it. And it's not that you're not good at it, it's just that you were knitting a scarf. So wouldn't recommend knitting scarves. The second piece of information that is banded around, continental knitting is faster than English knitting. This is a bit of a spicy one. And it can get me a little bit heated, because I didn't really know that this was a thing until I created my TikTok a few years ago. And me as an English knitter was suddenly inundated with comments about how I should knit continental knitting, how it's much faster, how it's much easier, how it's much more efficient, etc., etc. So let's just start with what's the difference between continental knitting and English knitting. Continental knitting is when you hold the yarn in your left hand and you move the needle around to pick up the yarn from your left hand and then knit it through that way. English knitting is when you hold the yarn in your right hand and you throw it around the needles and knit the stitch that way. Ultimately, they produce the same stitch, it's just a different way to do it. Now, people have said that continental knitting is faster because it's a slightly more efficient motion rather than throwing it, but ultimately, it's a matter of personal comfort. So whichever one you're used to and whichever one you find more comfortable and whichever one fits with the way that you knit is going to be the better option for you. I'm not there writing on continental knitters' comments that they should try knitting English style. I don't think many English knitters do that. However, it appears to be a myth that is very pervasive in the online community, so much that I have received so many comments on the way that I knit, and people saying, you should try continental and it's faster, etc. And I did actually. When I first received this comment, I accepted it in good faith, and I thought, okay, continental knitting, let's give it a whirl. And I did give it a whirl. And guess what? It wasn't faster for me because it wasn't how I was comfortable with knitting. I prefer my English style, and ultimately I have no issue with the speed to which I knit and the complexity to which I knit. I knit pretty fast and I knit pretty well. And if you are an English knitter, especially if you are a less experienced knitter and you're just starting out and you're seeing these comments, please ignore them. Please ignore them, because people just don't know what they're talking about, and I really don't know where they're learning this from. And just a point, please don't go on people's social media and comment on the way that they knit. It's so obnoxious, it's unnecessary, it's embarrassing for you because you obviously don't know what you're talking about. Stop, because nobody appreciates it. The third lie is at some point in your knitting career, you must invest in an interchangeable circular needle kit. This is, I guess, what's thought to be like helpful advice. I don't know if the object of this is to save people money in the end, but often the kits are not that cheap, and by the time you know that you like to knit with circular needles, you've probably already purchased enough circular needles that you're already going back on yourself. If you go back and buy a kit, that's certainly the situation I found myself in. By the time I realized that I preferred circular needles for everything, I'd already bought so many that it made no sense to buy the kit. And I'm sure lots of people are in the same situation. Or you're in a situation where if you buy early on in your knitting journey, then you don't even necessarily know if you're going to knit as frequently as you want to, and then so that could end up being a waste of money. But this is my circular needle collection, as you can see, very nicely contained. Probably uses up only about as much space as an interchangeable circular needle kit. And yeah, I've just collected this over the years. As I say, by the time I realised that I could have got a kit, it was too late. I'd already invested a lot of money in this. But you know what? I've got all the needles that I need now. And if I haven't got the exact needles that a pattern's asking for, then I'll just adapt the pattern to suit one of the sets of needles that I have. And I think also, as you get more into knitting, what you'll find is you prefer to work with certain weights of yarn. Like, for example, I knit kind of Aran and below. So a lot of Aran, a lot of DK, a lot of fingering weight. So I've got a lot of the smaller needles, and I've got a very sparse collection of larger needles because I just don't need them. And I think you'll probably find that with your style. I know a lot of people seem to knit primarily chunky or bigger knits, and they might not really have much use for having the small needles. So it's not necessarily beneficial to have all the needles you could possibly have, because you'll probably find that you only use some of them. But also, just like, what's wrong? What's wrong with this? What's wrong with me? I mean, ultimately, yes, this probably cost me more than an interchangeable circular needle kit, but I didn't know that at the time. And who's to say I would have enjoyed the circular needle kit? Like, they're good, they're functional, you know, they have different needle lengths and bits like that. It's not really a problem. And it means as well that I've got duplicates of different needles. So obviously, if you're someone like me and you've got multiple whips going on at once, like, I need to have multiples of these needles because some of them are stuck in whips that I'm not touching for months. Maybe that's just the way that I knit, but I find it quite useful to have multiples of different needles available and multiple cord sizes and bits like that. And finally, the idea that knitting socks is hard. So I don't really know where this one comes from. I wonder if it's because people see videos of people knitting socks on double pointed needles and it looks super intimidating and they think, wow, that looks like a massive headache. And I have to say, as somebody who's knit many, many pairs of socks, I also feel that way when I see somebody knitting on DPNs, because they are a lot to handle, and I personally struggle to knit anything beyond the grafting a toe on DPNs. Don't let that put you off. Here is my secret weapon for knitting socks: mini circular needle. Now, not everybody loves these, to be fair, and I'm going to do a whole separate video on knitting socks because I know there's a lot to say about it, and I also kind of want to do a bit of a knit along just to show people like it really is not that difficult. But yeah, I've had lots of comments from people who say that they would love to knit socks or they wish they could knit socks, and it's really, really not that complicated. I think because the yarn is thinner and the needles are thinner, people think that it looks really fiddly and therefore is more advanced, but that's really not the case. You're just utilizing exactly the same stitches and exactly the same things that you already utilize for bigger projects, just on a smaller needles and smaller yarn. And the thing is with socks is I think sometimes there's a lot of different aspects to it which people are unfamiliar with. So I reference grafting the toe, also working the heel, and they sound really intimidating, but it's really not that complicated once you're in a pattern and you're going through it step by step. So that's just my advice. Give it a go, take it step by step, look up each step if you get confused, and you will absolutely get there and you will love your socks. I actually started knitting socks not too far into my knitting journey, and these are they. Yeah, I did not use a pattern. Don't know if you could tell. I sort of freestyled it. which was not great with foot decreases. But as I said, it was my first ever time knitting socks and I had no idea how it worked. And at the time I thought patterns were scarier than just freestyling it. And then I made a monstrosity of a sock. But I will say they actually do fit my feet. I could wear them. I choose not to because they are a bit weird. But you can absolutely do it. And I've got a lot better now, by the way. Imagine that's how I think that's how all my knitted socks looked. And I'm here being like, guys, knitting socks is so easy. And I just knit like the most ridiculous socks. I am good at knitting socks, I promise. You have to take my word for it because I didn't bring up any to show you on camera. But anyway, my takeaway for socks is give it a go. You can do it. I believe in you. Now, the last thing is for you to believe in yourself. So I think those are all the things that I wanted to mention. The key thing is don't believe everything you read. And if you're unsure if something is true, ask me because I know it all. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, I would love it if you could subscribe and like, and I hope to see you soon.